Buenos dias amigos. Today we're at the Zocalo, Mexico City's main square, and I'm currently standing on top of what used to be the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. So there's a story, a legend behind how the Aztecs came to settle here, and is now represented on the Mexican flag. So if we just look up here, we can see you've got the green, white and red of the flag. So the green represents Mexico's independence from Spain. The white represents the purity of Mexicans' ideals and principles, and the red represents the blood spilt by the people when they fought during the War of Independence. But the thing that we're interested in today is in the middle of the flag, and we can't see it that well, so we're going to try and find another flag so that we can get a better look at it. Okay, this is better. In the middle we can see an eagle perched on top of a cactus over a lake, devouring a snake. And this image represents the Aztec legend. So the story goes that around 1100 AD, the Aztecs' main god, Huitzilopochtli, told them to leave their lands in a place called Aztlan and journey south until they found an eagle perched on top of a cactus over a lake, devouring a snake. And that would be the sign for them to stop traveling and settle. The term Aztec was actually given to them by the Spaniards shortly after they arrived and learned that the Aztecs had come from a land called Aztlan. So the Aztecs actually referred to themselves as mexicas, and mexicas is where we get the name Mexico from. So the mexicas set out on their journey south from Aztlan, which we think was located in what is now present-day state of Colorado in the States. And they journey south, and after many, many decades, they come to Tula, the capital of the Toltec civilization. Now, you know, the mexicas were relative latecomers to the Valley of Mexico, you know, this area in central Mexico, because by the time they arrive, you know, Tiatuacan and Tula have emerged, they've risen, they've grown, and they've enjoyed long periods of dominance over the area, followed by eventual decline. Tiatuacan has been abandoned for over half a millennia, and Tula is no longer the force that it was. But the Aztecs still really like Tula, they're really impressed by it, and many of them actually want to stay and settle there. But Huitzilopochtli says to them, no, this is not your destiny, you've got to carry on, keep heading south and find the eagle. So to cut a 200-year-long story short, the legend is that they eventually see an eagle perched right here in this very spot behind me. So what we have behind me is the Templo Mayor. We're just meters now from the Zocalo, and the main temple of the Aztecs is just over there where the green roof is. And it was a dual pyramid because it had two temples at the top, one dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, who was the god of war and sun, and the other dedicated to Tlaloc, who was the god of rain. What we can see right here in front of us is the wall that surrounded the bottom of the main temple. So just over there in the distance you can probably make out the head of a serpent, and then these ones here with the green covers on, they apparently still have some colour on them, which is why they are being protected. So the Mexicas started building their city in 1325, and I'm just moving away now from the main temple into Guatemala Street because I want to show you a photo of a map which was made in Germany in 1524, shortly after the Spanish arrived. So as I mentioned in our video on Tiatuacan, there used to be 5 lakes in the Valley of Mexico, and now there are none. So the only water that really remains in this area is from the canals of Lake Xochimilco, which is to the south of Mexico City. And so this map that I want to show you of Tenochtitlan is just here. And so, you know, from this map, it looks like the city was built in the middle of the lake. However, it was actually built towards the west side of Lake Texcoco. So the centre of Tenochtitlan there was built on top of a muddy island, as was its twin city, which was called Tlatelolco, and this was built 13 years after. So the rest of the city was built by sinking tons of water-resistant willow tree trunks, which were then able to take the weight of the buildings as well as help them to construct causeways to link the floating cities to the mainland. So you can see here we've got sort of 4 main causeways sort of occupying the north, south, east and west of the city. And you know, the cardinal points were of importance, of, you know, special spiritual significance to the Mexicas and other civilizations in Mesoamerica, because amongst other things, they followed the direction of the sun's path, you know, from east to west. And so north and south also represented up and down. So although this map doesn't include some of the smaller causeways that were also connecting the city to the mainland, I do like this map because it really gives you a sense of the ingenuity of the Aztecs, to have been able to, you know, create such a huge, complex urban area. You know, it's essentially a floating city. And at its peak, it may have had as many as 400,000 people living here, which dwarfed pretty much all of the European cities at that time, with the exception of maybe Constantinople and Paris. So we're back at the Templo Mayor, and if you look down there, you can see a large disc, which was discovered in 1978 when some workmen struck it whilst digging. Up until that point, the site had been lost as the Spanish basically built over the top of this sacred area and hadn't bothered to record its location, as it was of no significance to them. But when the president came to see this disc, I mean, not that one itself, that's a replica, but when he came to see the original, he said, right, let's excavate the area and explore further. So what they did, they had to knock down a lot of the colonial buildings. So over there in the distance, I don't know if you can make out sort of the pink and yellow buildings there. They're the colonial buildings that would have basically been sat on top of this site, and they were cleared to make room for the archaeological diggings. So I've just moved away from the disc of Kuliwakan. I was getting quite a lot of attention from the tour guides there, who are trying to give me the history and explain to me the meaning behind the Templo Mayor. So I'm just back in the Zocalo, and I thought I'd explain the myth behind the disc from here. So Kuliwakan had a mother who was a goddess, and her name was Kuliwakan, and she was a cleaner, and as her duties as a cleaner, she was one day sweeping out the temple on top of the sacred mountain of Tiatuaca, and suddenly this ball of feathers came out of the sky, and the next thing she knows, she's fallen pregnant. So Kuliwakan, when she hears about this, is pretty angry. You know, she's wondering, how on earth has my mum managed to fall pregnant? She has no idea who the father is. And when I ask her to explain how she got pregnant, she's talking to me about balls of feathers falling out of the sky. So yeah, she's rightly indignant, but she possibly goes a little bit too far, because she then goes and rounds up her 400 brothers and says, we're going to go and march on Tiatuaca and kill our mother and her unborn child. Now you might think that her having 400 brothers is a tad unrealistic, but then when you think that her mother was able to get pregnant from a ball of feathers falling out of the sky, it does seem rather more plausible. Luckily for Kuliwakan, her unborn child was none other than Huitzilopochtli, the god of war. And so, you know, being the god of war, he naturally springs out of the womb as a fully developed warrior, carrying all the arms that he needs to defend himself against Kuliwakan and the 400 brothers. So he decapitates his sister and then sends her head rolling down the mountain, which is enough to put her brothers off the idea of trying to kill him and his mother. Obviously, this story is one of a number of legends that are central to Aztec mythology, and they've commemorated it with that stone disc. The stone disc was placed at the bottom of the Great Temple as a reminder to the enemies of the Mexicas of what would happen to them if they went against them. So in a minute we're going to be heading up to the terrace up there behind me, partly to get a better look of the site here, but also because I've not had a coffee today and I'm starving. But right now I want to take you back to good old Guatemala Street to have a look at a map of how experts think this site was laid out. So here we've got the hypothetical map of the ceremonial centre of Tenochtitlan. So right here, obviously, this is the main temple with the temple of Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli here at the top. And then you've got the stairs obviously going up to the top where they would have sacrificed people. And then this here would have been where the disc of Kuliwakan lay. And then to either side, you've got these two military schools for eagle and jaguar warriors. So these were the fiercest and bravest warriors of noble birth. And then to either side of them, so these two here, you've got the temples of Tezcatlipoca and Mictlan Tecutli. the latter of those being the god of death. But we'll cover those in another video, or we'll be here all day. And then just here on the corner here, you've got the university, which was also acting as a public school. And finally down here, you've got the Temple of the Sun. I almost forgot. Here we've got the ball court for the Juego de Pelota, which was the ball game which the Olmecs also played, and this held great ritual significance because the losing captain would be sacrificed at the end of the game. I'll talk about Aztec warfare and sacrifice in another video, but right now I just want to point out that in 2015, during some archaeological excavations in this building behind me, they found some Aztec skulls. So this is probably why we've got this sign here which says we've moved to Guatemala number 26. You know, the archaeologists probably said to them, "Oi, we found some Aztec skulls under your shop. Psh, get lost, we're going to do some more digging." And in the additional excavation that they did, they found a tower of skulls that was about 6 feet high. So here you can see you've got skulls all in a line here, and they were joined by wooden beams. So they would basically smash holes in the skulls there to create space for the wooden beam to go through. And this was known as a Sompandli, which in Aztec means skull rack. Skull racks were a common feature of Aztec cities. You know, they were often found in them, but what was not common was the fact that in this site they found 600 skulls. So this was a huge number and led them to believe that this was indeed the way Sompandli, way meaning great, so the great skull rack. I'm now just heading over, so I'm going to show you a picture of what they think this great skull rack looked like. I mean, God knows how many skulls may have been on this great skull rack. I mean, the Spaniards in their accounts of what they found at Tenochtitlan talked about the great skull rack, and some had estimated there being over 50,000 skulls at the site, and others claimed there were closer to 150,000. Whether these estimates were genuine or whether they were part of a propaganda campaign to paint the Aztecs as a barbaric people, I guess we'll never know, as the Spanish destroyed a significant chunk of this site when they started building on top of it. I think what we can say though is that human sacrifice was a part of Mesoamerican life. Many of the ancient civilizations practiced it. However, the Aztecs took it to another level. So I'm now on the terrace that I've been meaning to get to for the last half hour, and over in the distance I think you can hear the drums, the beat of some drums over there, and there's some people I think doing some sort of Aztec dance, or an impression of an Aztec dance. And the cathedral over there is apparently where the Temple of the Sun is placed. You used to be able to go and see it a couple of years ago, but since the pandemic they've not allowed anyone to go down. And then sort of next to the cathedral, you know, closer to where we are, is Guatemala Street, and that is where the university was. But then obviously down here we've now got the main temple, and the green roof there, that's where the main temple, you know, the temples of Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc were. I overheard someone say earlier that part of the temple fell off a couple of months ago, which may be why they have the roof and wooden panelling around it. The temple was originally 65 meters high, which is enormous. I mean, that's similar to the height of the Pyramid of the Sun at Tiatuaca, but it's now pretty much down at street level. And it was even lower when the colonial buildings on top of it were first knocked down, but now that weight has been lifted, it has started to rise again. So for the Aztecs, Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc were twins because they represented the sun and rain, and when these two gods met, in other words, when the rain and sun came together, the result was photosynthesis and the creation of life. But anyway, I'm going to shut up now because my food has arrived. So I ordered some guacamole, although it looks like it's more of just totopos with a little bit of guacamole added in, and then we've got a crepe with some cheese and mushrooms. So I'm going to get stuck in because I'm absolutely starving. But yeah, I'll see you down at Ground Zero. What I want to cover now as we head to our final place is how the Aztecs managed to settle, grow, conquer and dominate this area. Why were they not met with fierce resistance by other tribes? So the first reason, and a very important one, was that their language, Nahuatl, was already being spoken in the region. You know, it arrived to the Valley of Mexico before they did, and girl there just saying bye, Viva Mexico. So I arrived here in the region before they did, and so there were hundreds of languages that were being spoken in the region, but they were using Nahuatl as the common language, you know, the lingua franca, to communicate amongst themselves. So a bit like how it is in India today. You know, if you go there, there are hundreds of different languages being spoken, but they will use English as the language to communicate amongst themselves. Another important reason was that the Aztecs strongly identified with the people of Tula and Tiatuacan. They saw themselves as the descendants of these people and identified with them partly because of their warrior culture and partly because of their practice of human sacrifice. So they excavated and took ceramics, pottery, figurines, and used them to help form their own unique identity and culture. And the third and final reason was that the Aztecs created a royal lineage from the local people of Kuliwakan, who were essentially a subset of the Toltecs and were living to the south of Lake Texcoco. So the Mexica's ruler, their leader, their chief, who guided them to the eagle on the cactus, when he died in 1372, the Mexicas decide to create a royal lineage, and they choose a royal from the Kuliwakan people to be their first Tlatoani, their first king. So he becomes the new king, but remaining under the rule of the Kuliwakan people. And indeed, the next two kings are also governing under the rule of Kuliwakan, but it's the fourth Tlatoani, the fourth king of the Aztecs, that finally leads them in a war of independence against the Kuliwakan people, and they're victorious. And so from that point, they have independence and are then able to set out building their empire. So the Aztecs gain their legitimacy in the area through their language and the appropriation of some aspects of local cultures, religion and royalty. So we're now standing outside a restaurant called Café de Tacuba on a street also with the same name, Tacuba. So what's the relevance of this? What's the significance? Well, it's quite tenuous, guys. I mean, the Aztecs, in order to create the great empire that they did, they had to ally with two cities to form a triple alliance. So on the Lake of Texcoco, they formed an alliance with one city to the east of the lake called Texcoco, and to the west there was another city called Tacuba. One of Mexico's most famous rock bands, a band from the 90s, called themselves Café Tacuba. So both they and this restaurant named themselves after the ancient city. And that's quite a common thing here in Mexico. It's very characteristic of the country for restaurants, places, streets, cities, towns, states to be named after people or places or events of historical importance. So the Triple Alliance gave the Aztecs the economic and political stability they needed to create their huge empire. At its peak, they ruled over 10 million people across 500 cities who had to pay tribute and to provide people for the practice of human sacrifice. In the next video, we'll see how these demands, these burdens on the local people created resentment and precipitated the Aztecs' demise. But that's for next time. Hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.